Every person you spoke to today lied to you. Not once, not twice. According to research from the University of Massachusetts, the average person hears between 10 and 200 lies per day and catches almost none of them. You are being deceived right now, in your career, in your relationships, in negotiations, and you do not even know it. That is not an opinion. That is the finding of a landmark study conducted at UCLA's psychology department by Dr. Albert Mehrabian, a study that has been replicated and confirmed across decades of behavioral research. While you focus on what people say, the real conversation, the one that determines whether you get the promotion, close the deal, or get manipulated without ever realizing it, is playing out in micro-movements of the face, shifts in posture, variations in vocal tone, and patterns of eye contact that last less than 1/5 of a second. You are essentially walking through life reading 7% of the room. The other 93% is a language you were never taught. And that language is running your career, your relationships, and your decisions whether you know it or not. Here is the uncomfortable part. While you are blind to this invisible layer of communication, other people are not. Negotiators, trial lawyers, intelligence officers, and high-level sales professionals have been trained to read this hidden channel. They see what you broadcast without permission. They decode your fear, your uncertainty, your eagerness, your bluff. And they use it every single day in boardrooms, in negotiations, in relationships. Someone is reading you more accurately than you are reading them. That asymmetry is costing you. It is costing you money. It is costing you respect. It is costing you control. And that brings us to the second war you are losing, the one inside your own skull. A study published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology tracked decision-making accuracy under emotional stress. The results were devastating. When cortisol, the stress hormone, floods your prefrontal cortex, your decision-making accuracy drops by up to 40%. 40%. That means nearly half of the choices you make when you are angry, anxious, pressured, or threatened are statistically likely to be wrong. You are not just failing to read the room. You are failing to control the one organ that is supposed to give you an advantage, your own brain. Now consider this. The average professional faces between 30 and 50 micro-decisions per day that involve other people, negotiations, confrontations, requests, social dynamics, and leadership moments. If you are blind to the nonverbal data and simultaneously compromised by your own emotional reactivity, you are operating at a fraction of your capacity. You are bringing a flashlight to a battlefield where everyone else has night vision. This is the invisible war. It has two fronts. The external front, where you need to decode what people are really thinking, feeling, and planning before they ever open their mouths. And the internal front, where you need to build a mind so disciplined, so structurally fortified, that stress, criticism, manipulation, and chaos bounce off it like rounds off armored steel. Most books pick one side. They teach you body language tricks, or they give you feel-good Stoic quotes. This audiobook does neither. What you are about to learn is a complete operating system for psychological dominance that works on both fronts simultaneously. By the time you finish, you will not just understand people better. You will see through them, and you will not just feel calmer under pressure. You will be structurally incapable of being rattled by anything that does not deserve your emotional energy. Let me tell you what separates the 3% from everyone else. McKinsey & Company conducted a global analysis of over 5,000 executives and identified a pattern that separated top-tier performers from average ones. It was not intelligence. It was not experience. It was not even work ethic. The single most consistent differentiator was what they called interpersonal acuity combined with emotional regulation. In plain language, the ability to read a room accurately and stay calm while doing it. The 3% see clearly and think coldly. The 97% react emotionally and guess blindly. The average professional walks into a meeting and listens to words. The elite operator walks into the same meeting and reads the baseline. They noticed that the CFO shifted her weight backward when the budget question came up. They catch the micro-expression of contempt that flickered across the client's face for exactly 0.04 of a second when the proposal number was mentioned. They registered that the colleague who said, "I totally support this," did so while unconsciously creating a physical barrier with crossed arms and angled shoulders. The average professional walks out of that meeting thinking it went well. The elite operator walks out knowing exactly who is lying, who is afraid, and who is about to sabotage the project. Same meeting, same words spoken, completely different intelligence gathered. That is the gap this audiobook closes. But here is the part nobody tells you about reading people. It is useless if you cannot control yourself. Paul Ekman, the psychologist whose research on facial expressions was used to train FBI and CIA interrogators, made a critical observation that most people ignore. He found that the ability to detect deception drops by over 60% when the observer is emotionally aroused. Read that again. If you are stressed, angry, or anxious, your lie detection capability essentially shuts down. Your amygdala hijacks your perception. You see threats that are not there and miss threats that are. This is why the ancient Stoics were not philosophers sitting in comfortable libraries debating abstract ideas. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations while commanding Roman legions on the frozen Danube frontier. Epictetus developed his philosophy while enduring literal slavery. Seneca refined his principles while navigating the most politically dangerous court in human history. These men built mental operating systems under conditions that would break most modern professionals, and their methods, when combined with 21st century neuroscience, produced something extraordinary. A mind that does not flinch. A mind that sees reality with surgical precision because it has eliminated the emotional distortion that clouds everyone else's vision. That is what you are building in this audiobook. Not motivation, not inspiration. A system, a dual operating system with two integrated modules. Module 1 is external intelligence. You will learn the cognitive X-ray, the ability to simulate another person's thought process and predict their behavior before they act. You will master the baseline protocol, the professional method used by behavioral analysts to detect lies, hidden agendas, and emotional deception by establishing what normal looks like before you look for what is abnormal. You will learn to read micro-expressions, those involuntary flashes of true emotion that the human face cannot suppress, no matter how skilled the liar. Module 2 is internal architecture. You will build what I call emotional Kevlar, a layered defense system that makes you functionally immune to criticism, gaslighting, social pressure, and decision-making under stress. You will master Stoic reframing, the mental framework that turns every obstacle, every setback, every attack into raw material for your advantage. And you will learn the silence protocol, the strategic communication system that makes you the most powerful person in any room by controlling not just what you say, but when and how you choose to say nothing. Here is your first operational principle, and it is non-negotiable. See clearly, think coldly, act decisively. That sequence matters. You cannot act decisively if your thinking is polluted by emotion. You cannot think coldly if your perception is compromised by poor data. And you cannot see clearly if you have never been trained to read the invisible 93%. This audiobook trains all three, in sequence, with protocols you can deploy starting tomorrow morning. The invisible war has been raging your entire life. You have been fighting it unarmed. That ends now. In the next chapter, you will learn the first and most powerful weapon in your arsenal, the cognitive X-ray. You will discover how to step inside another person's mind, simulate their thought process, and understand their true intentions before they speak a single word. What you learn will make every conversation you have for the rest of your life a fundamentally different experience. And once you see it, you will never unsee it. Chapter 2. Cognitive X-ray: How to Simulate Minds. In 1996, a team of neuroscientists at the University of Parma in Italy discovered something that would fundamentally change our understanding of the human brain. Dr. Giacomo Rizzolatti and his colleagues were studying motor neurons in macaque monkeys when they noticed something no one expected. A specific group of neurons fired not only when the monkey performed an action, but when the monkey watched someone else perform that same action. The brain was literally simulating another being's experience. They called them mirror neurons. And within a decade, research at UCLA's Brain Mapping Center confirmed that humans possess the most advanced mirror neuron system ever observed in any species. You have a built-in neural architecture designed to simulate other people's minds. You were born with it, and you have never been trained to use it deliberately. That changes now. What you are about to learn is the cognitive X-ray, a systematic method for stepping inside another person's mental framework, running their thought process as if it were your own, and extracting their true intentions before they reveal them through words or actions. This is not empathy in the soft, emotional sense. This is tactical empathy. It is the difference between feeling sorry for someone and understanding exactly what they will do next and why. The Princeton Social Neuroscience Lab, under the direction of Dr. Yuri Hassan, published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that revealed something remarkable. When two people are engaged in genuine communication, their brain activity synchronizes. The listener's neural patterns begin to mirror the speaker's patterns, sometimes even preceding them. The researchers called it neural coupling, and the degree of coupling directly predicted how accurately the listener understood the speaker's intentions. The tighter the coupling, the deeper the comprehension. Here is the critical insight. This coupling does not happen automatically at full capacity. It requires active, deliberate attention to specific channels of information that most people ignore. The cognitive X-ray operates on 3 channels. Master all 3, and you will understand what a person is truly thinking with a level of accuracy that will feel to everyone around you, like you are reading their mind. Channel 1 is motive mapping. Every human being, in every interaction, is driven by one of 4 core motives. They are seeking safety, seeking status, seeking connection, or seeking control. That is it. For drives, behind every sentence spoken in a boardroom, every text message sent at midnight, every negotiation tactic deployed across a table, one of these 4 motives is operating as the primary engine. Your first task in any interaction is to identify which one is dominant. Here is how the average person handles a negotiation. They listen to the words. They react to the surface position. If the other party says the price is too high, the average person hears a price objection and starts adjusting numbers. The cognitive X-ray operator hears something entirely different. They ask a silent question. What is the motive? Is this person genuinely resource-constrained, meaning their primary motive is safety? Are they trying to demonstrate to their team that they are a tough negotiator, meaning the motive is status? Are they testing whether you will hold firm or fold, meaning the motive is control? Or are they expressing dissatisfaction with the relationship dynamic, meaning the motive is connection? Same words, for completely different realities underneath. And the response that works for one motive will catastrophically backfire with another. Offering a discount to someone driven by control does not satisfy them. It tells them you are weak, and they will push harder. Standing firm with someone driven by connection does not earn respect. It damages the relationship and kills the deal entirely. Harvard's program on negotiation published a 20-year longitudinal study analyzing over 14,000 negotiation outcomes. The single strongest predictor of success was not the negotiator's opening position, their preparation, or their willingness to walk away. It was their accuracy in identifying the counterpart's underlying motive within the first 5 minutes of interaction. Negotiators who correctly identified motive had a 71% success rate. Those who misidentified motive dropped to 23%. Same skills, same preparation. The only variable was whether they could see beneath the words to the engine driving them. That is channel 1. Map the motive. Before you respond to anything, ask yourself one question. What does this person actually want? Safety, status, connection, or control? You will be wrong sometimes. But the act of asking that question alone puts you ahead of 90% of every person in every room you will ever enter. Channel 2 is pattern recognition. People are not random. They are terrifyingly predictable. Research from the University of Cambridge, analyzing behavioral data from over 70,000 subjects, found that past behavior predicts future behavior with an accuracy rate of approximately 83%. 83%. That means if you observe someone's pattern across 3 or more interactions, You can predict their next move with near mathematical certainty. The cognitive X-ray approach to pattern recognition works like this. You are looking for three things: decision speed, conflict style, and energy allocation. Decision speed tells you whether someone processes information quickly and acts on impulse, or deliberates carefully and acts with caution. This single variable predicts how they will behave under pressure better than any personality test ever designed. Conflict style tells you whether a person confronts directly, avoids and deflects, seeks compromise, or escalates. Watch how someone handles a minor disagreement, a wrong coffee order, a scheduling conflict, a mild criticism. That is their conflict operating system, and it does not change when the stakes get higher. It just amplifies. Energy allocation tells you what a person actually values, not what they say they value. Ignore their words entirely. Watch where they spend their time, their money, and their emotional energy. A person who says they value family but spends every evening answering work emails after dinner has told you everything you need to know. Their declared values are performance. Their allocated energy is truth. 3 data points: decision speed, conflict style, energy allocation. Collect these across 2 or 3 interactions with any person, and you will have a behavioral model that predicts their actions more accurately than they can predict themselves. This is not speculation. This is applied behavioral science. Channel 3 is emotional trajectory mapping. People do not exist in emotional snapshots. They move along emotional trajectories, and if you can identify the direction of the trajectory, you can predict where someone will be emotionally in the near future, even if their current state seems calm. Dr. James Gross at Stanford's Psychophysiology Laboratory has spent over 2 decades studying emotional regulation. His research demonstrates that emotions follow predictable escalation and de-escalation curves. A person who is slightly irritated in a meeting at 10 in the morning and mildly frustrated by noon is not going to be calm by 3 in the afternoon. They are on an upward trajectory. Without intervention, they will reach a threshold where emotional reasoning overrides rational processing. If you can see that trajectory in real time, you can either intervene to redirect it or, if strategy demands, allow it to continue and predict the exact moment they will make an emotional mistake. Elite operators do not react to where someone is. They respond to where someone is going. The average person sees a calm colleague and assumes everything is fine. The cognitive X-ray operator notices the jaw tension that was not there yesterday, the slightly faster speech rate, the shortened sentences. They read the trajectory and know that this person is 14 hours away from a breaking point. That is not mind reading. That is applied observation powered by neuroscience. Now here is the integration point. These 3 channels do not operate in isolation. When you combine motive mapping, pattern recognition, and emotional trajectory mapping, something extraordinary happens. You build a real-time simulation of another person's mind. You know what they want, you know how they typically behave, and you know where they are headed emotionally. With those 3 inputs, predicting their next move becomes less like guessing and more like reading a script they do not know they are following. Let me give you the practical deployment protocol. Starting tomorrow, choose one person in your professional life, a colleague, a client, a supervisor, anyone you interact with regularly. For 1 full week, observe them through the 3 channels without saying a word about what you are doing. Ask yourself 3 questions after every interaction. What was their dominant motive in that conversation? What pattern am I seeing in their decision speed, conflict style, and energy allocation? In what direction is their emotional trajectory moving? Write your observations down. At the end of 7 days, you will have a behavioral profile of that person that is more accurate than anything a personality assessment could produce. And you will have built the foundational skill of the cognitive X-ray, the ability to look at a human being and see not the mask they present, but the operating system running underneath. See clearly, think coldly, act decisively. You now have the first weapon. You can simulate minds. But simulation alone is not enough. Because the most dangerous people in your life are not the ones who act strangely. They are the ones who act normally while hiding something lethal underneath. In the next chapter, you will learn the baseline protocol, the professional method used by FBI behavioral analysts to detect when someone's normal is actually a carefully constructed lie. And the first step of that protocol will change the way you observe every human being you encounter from this moment forward. Chapter 3. The Baseline Protocol: Detecting Lies. Every single day, you are lied to between 10 and 200 times. That is not a guess. That is the finding of Dr. Robert Feldman's research at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, published in the Journal of Basic and Applied Social Psychology. This study found that in a typical 10-minute conversation between two people who have just met, an average of 3 lies are told. Among people who already know each other, the number is higher. In professional settings, where stakes involve money, reputation, and power, the frequency increases dramatically. You are swimming in deception. And the worst part is not that people lie to you. The worst part is that you are terrible at catching it. Dr. Paul Ekman, the psychologist whose 40 years of research on deception became the foundation for training programs at the FBI, CIA, and Secret Service, tested over 15,000 people across all professions on their ability to detect lies. The average accuracy rate was 53%. 53. That is barely better than a coin flip. Judges, police officers, therapists, people whose entire careers depend on reading honesty, performed no better than college freshmen guessing randomly. The human ability to detect deception without training is, statistically, almost non-existent. But here is what changes everything. Within that same dataset, Ekman identified a small group he called Wizards of Deception Detection. These individuals scored above 90% accuracy. They were not psychic. They were not gifted with some supernatural sense. They had learned, either through training or through years of high-stakes experience, a specific method. They did not listen for lies. They watched for deviations from a baseline. That distinction is the entire foundation of what you are about to learn. The baseline protocol is the professional method used by behavioral analysts, intelligence officers, and forensic interviewers to detect deception, not by looking for signs of lying, but by first establishing what normal looks like, and then watching for departures from that normal. This is a critical shift in your mental model. Most people try to catch liars by looking for nervousness, avoiding eye contact, fidgeting, touching the face. That approach fails for a simple reason. Nervous people look nervous whether they are lying or not. Confident liars look calm whether they are telling the truth or not. The symptoms most people associate with lying are symptoms of anxiety, not deception. And anxiety has 100 causes that have nothing to do with dishonesty. The baseline protocol eliminates this problem entirely. It works in 3 phases. Phase 1 is calibration. Before you ever attempt to assess whether someone is being truthful, you must spend time observing them when you know they are telling the truth. This is the baseline. You are cataloging their normal behavior across 5 specific channels. Their speech rate, how fast or slow they naturally talk. Their eye movement pattern, where their eyes go when they are recalling a genuine memory versus constructing a response. Their physical stillness or restlessness, how much they naturally move when relaxed. Their sentence structure, whether they typically speak in long, detailed sentences or short, direct ones. And their response latency, the natural gap between when you ask a question and when they begin answering. These 5 channels create a behavioral fingerprint that is unique to every individual. A study conducted at the University of Portsmouth's Department of Psychology, led by Professor Aldert Fry, one of the world's foremost deception researchers, confirmed that deviations from an individual's established baseline are significantly more reliable indicators of deception than any universal lying sign. There is no single behavior that means someone is lying. There is only behavior that deviates from that specific person's normal. Here is the practical application. The next time you are in a meeting, a negotiation, or even a casual conversation where truth matters, spend the first 3 to 5 minutes asking questions you already know the answers to. Simple, non-threatening questions. Where did you go to school? How long have you been with the company? What did you work on last quarter? You are not interested in the answers. You are calibrating. You are watching their eyes, their speech tempo, their body movements, their sentence length, their response time. You are building the baseline against which everything that follows will be measured. Phase 2 is deviation detection. Once you have the baseline, you shift into observation mode. Now you ask the questions that actually matter. The questions about commitment, about budget, about loyalty, about what really happened. And you watch for deviations across the same 5 channels. The deviations you are looking for are specific. A sudden change in speech rate, either significantly faster or significantly slower than their baseline. A shift in eye movement pattern. Research from Dr. Sharon Leal at the University of Portsmouth shows that people constructing a fabricated response often exhibit different gaze patterns than when they are genuinely recalling information. An increase or decrease in physical movement. Someone who is relaxed and still who suddenly begins fidgeting, or someone who is naturally animated who becomes rigidly still. A change in sentence structure, particularly a shift from detailed, narrative responses to short, defensive ones, or the reverse, an unusually elaborate and detailed response to a question that should have been simple. And a change in response latency, a suddenly longer pause before answering, or a suspiciously instant response to a question that should have required thought. No single deviation means someone is lying. That is critical. You are looking for clusters. 2 or more deviations occurring simultaneously or within seconds of each other on a single question. Dr. Fry's research at Portsmouth demonstrated that clustered deviations predict deception with an accuracy rate between 72 and 80%, depending on the context. A single raised eyebrow means nothing. A raised eyebrow combined with a speech rate change combined with a response latency shift on the same question means something significant. Phase 3 is strategic testing. This is where the baseline protocol becomes a precision instrument. Once you have detected a cluster of deviations on a specific topic, you do not confront. Confrontation triggers defensive mechanisms that make further detection nearly impossible. Instead, you test. You move the conversation to a neutral, safe topic for 2 to 3 minutes. You let the person return to their baseline. Then you circle back to the sensitive topic, but from a different angle. You ask the same question in different words. You ask a question adjacent to the sensitive area. If the same cluster of deviations reappears on the same topic approach from a new angle, you now have a reliable signal. That topic is producing behavioral stress. That does not automatically mean deception. It could mean shame, anxiety, or discomfort about something they would rather not discuss. But it tells you with high confidence that the surface story and the underlying reality do not match. And that is intelligence you can act on. Now, here is where most people make a fatal mistake, and understanding this separates elite operators from amateurs. The average person, once they suspect deception, becomes emotionally activated. Their heart rate increases. Their attention narrows. They start looking for confirmation of what they already believe, which is a cognitive bias researchers at Princeton call confirmation bias. And the moment emotional activation occurs, remember what Dr. Ekman found: deception detection accuracy drops by over 60%. You become worse at detecting lies precisely at the moment you suspect one. The elite operator does the opposite. When deviation clusters appear, they become calmer. They slow their own breathing. They maintain neutral facial expression. They continue the conversation as if nothing has changed. Inside, they are cataloging, testing, and building a behavioral case. Outside, they are invisible. This is where the internal architecture we discussed in the first chapter becomes operationally critical. You cannot run the baseline protocol if your own emotions compromise your observation capability. The external intelligence system requires the internal discipline system to function. They are not separate skills. They are 2 halves of the same weapon. Let me give you a deployment scenario you can use this week. Choose a professional interaction where the stakes are moderate, a project update, a vendor call, a team check-in. Spend the first 5 minutes calibrating. Observe the 5 channels. Then ask one question that probes a potential area of concern. Watch for deviation clusters. Do not react. Simply observe. After the interaction, write down what you saw. The specific channels, the specific deviations, the specific question that triggered them. Do this 3 times across 3 different interactions. By the 3rd time, you will notice something remarkable. You will begin to see deviations you never noticed before. Not because they were not there, but because you were never looking with the right framework. The baseline protocol does not give you a new sense. It activates one you already had and never used. See clearly, think coldly, act decisively. You now know how to simulate a mind and how to detect when that mind is hiding something from you. But words and behavioral deviations are only part of the picture. The deepest layer of human communication, the one that is almost impossible to fake, lives in the face. In involuntary muscular contractions that last less than half a second and reveal emotions the person does not even know they are feeling. In the next chapter, you will learn to read micro-expressions, the 93% of communication that happens in silence. And you will understand why the face never lies, even when every other part of a person is performing flawlessly. Chapter 4. Micro-expressions, the 93%. The human face contains 43 muscles. 43. And every single one of them is capable of betraying a secret that the person wearing that face desperately wants to keep hidden. Not because they choose to reveal it, because they cannot stop it. In 1967, Dr. Paul Ekman and Dr. Wallace Friesen were analyzing film footage of psychiatric patients during clinical interviews. One patient, a woman who had been hospitalized for severe depression, told her doctors she was feeling much better and requested a weekend pass to visit her family. She smiled warmly. Her tone was optimistic. Every word she spoke projected recovery. The doctors were convinced. But Ekman and Friesen, reviewing the footage frame by frame at 1/25th of a second intervals, caught something that no one in the room had seen. In a single frame, lasting approximately 1/15th of a second, the woman's face contorted into an expression of absolute anguish. It appeared and vanished so quickly that no human eye could consciously detect it at normal speed. The woman later confessed that she had been planning to end her own life during the weekend visit. Her words lied. Her conscious expression lied. But her face, for 1/15th of a second, told the truth. That discovery launched 4 decades of research that would eventually produce the facial action coding system, the most comprehensive map of human facial expression ever created. And it revealed a fundamental truth about human communication that most people still do not understand. You can control your words. You can control your tone. You can rehearse your gestures and regulate your posture. But you cannot control micro-expressions. They are generated by the limbic system, the ancient emotional core of your brain, and they fire before your neocortex, the conscious rational mind, has time to intervene. They are the one channel of communication that cannot be faked, suppressed, or rehearsed. And they are happening in every conversation you have, every meeting, every negotiation, every interview, every interaction with your partner, your children, your colleagues. The real emotional truth is flashing across faces around you dozens of times per day. You are just not fast enough to see it. Yet, Dr. Ekman's research, now spanning over 50 years and validated across studies involving subjects from over 21 countries and multiple isolated indigenous cultures, identified 7 universal micro-expressions. 7 emotions that produce the same involuntary facial configurations in every human being on the planet, regardless of culture, language, upbringing, or training. Happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, contempt, and surprise. These 7 are hardwired. A person born blind who has never seen a human face produces the same facial configurations as a sighted person when experiencing these emotions. They are not learned. They are biological. Here is what matters for your operational capability. You do not need to master all 7 simultaneously. For professional and strategic contexts, 3 micro-expressions deliver approximately 80% of the actionable intelligence you need: contempt, fear, and disgust. These are the 3 that people work hardest to hide and that carry the most consequential information in high-stakes interactions. Contempt is the single most dangerous micro-expression in professional environments. Research published by Dr. John Gottman at the University of Washington, who spent over 4 decades studying interpersonal dynamics, identified contempt as the #1 predictor of relationship destruction, with a prediction accuracy above 90%. Contempt is not disagreement. Contempt is the belief that the other person is beneath you. and it manifests in one unmistakable way: the unilateral lip raise. One corner of the mouth pulls upward while the other remains neutral. It is the only asymmetrical expression among the 7 universals. And when you see it, even for a fraction of a second, directed at you or your proposal or your team during a negotiation, you now know something that the person showing it would never voluntarily tell you. They do not respect you or what you are offering. No amount of data, persuasion, or concession will change their position because their objection is not rational. It is hierarchical. Adjusting your strategy at that point becomes not just useful, but essential. Fear is the micro-expression that reveals vulnerability. The eyebrows pull together and upward. The upper eyelids rise. The lips stretch horizontally. When you detect fear during a negotiation or confrontation, you have identified the other party's pressure point. Something about the current topic or trajectory is threatening their position, their safety, or their status. Fear micro-expressions often flash at the exact moment you are closest to the truth they are trying to protect. This is why the baseline protocol and micro-expression reading work as an integrated system. If your baseline protocol detects a deviation cluster on a specific topic and a fear micro-expression appears during the same line of questioning, you now have convergent evidence from 2 independent channels. The reliability of your assessment increases exponentially. Disgust is the micro-expression that signals moral or value-based rejection. The nose wrinkles. The upper lip raises. The cheeks push upward. Disgust in professional settings typically surfaces when someone encounters a proposal, a person, or a situation that violates their core values or expectations. It is distinct from disagreement or discomfort. Disgust means contamination. The person experiencing it does not just dislike what is being presented. They feel repelled by it. Detecting disgust early allows you to pivot immediately because no logical argument overcomes a visceral disgust response. You must reframe the entire approach or withdraw and re-engage on different terms. Now, here is the training methodology that will build your detection speed. Dr. Ekman developed a digital training tool called the Micro-Expression Training Tool, which has been validated in peer-reviewed studies published in the journal Motivation and Emotion. Subjects who completed the training improved their micro-expression detection accuracy from an average of 48% to over 72% within a single 1-hour session. Those who continued practicing reached accuracy rates above 80% within 2 weeks. The human visual system can be trained to detect stimuli that last less than 1/5 of a second. It requires practice, not talent. But I am going to give you a field method you can start using today without any digital tools. It is called the triangle scan, and it works like this. In any face-to-face interaction, your eyes naturally focus on the other person's eyes. This is social convention, and it is inadequate for micro-expression detection. Instead, soften your gaze and let your visual attention rest on an imaginary triangle formed by the outer corners of both eyes and the center of the mouth. Do not stare at any single point. Let your peripheral vision cover the entire triangle. This technique, adapted from training methods used at the Paul Ekman Group and documented in peer-reviewed literature on visual attention, allows your visual system to capture micro-expressions across all 3 critical zones of the face simultaneously: the brow region for fear and surprise, the eye region for anger and sadness, and the mouth region for contempt and disgust. You will not consciously see the micro-expression in the first few days of practice. What you will notice is a feeling, a gut sense that something shifted, that subtle sense of something was off that you have experienced hundreds of times in your life but could never explain. That feeling is your limbic system detecting a micro-expression that your conscious mind was too slow to process. With deliberate practice using the triangle scan, you begin to close that gap. Within 2 weeks of daily practice, you will start consciously seeing what your unconscious has been detecting all along. The average person walks through life reading only the surface performance that other people present. They hear the confident words, see the polished smile, and accept the mask as reality. The elite operator sees the 43 muscles underneath. They catch the 1/15th of a second flash of contempt that tells them the deal is dead before the handshake. They detect the micro-fear that reveals where the real leverage is hiding. They notice the disgust that signals a fundamental value misalignment that no amount of persuasion will overcome. Same room, same conversation, a completely different level of information. But here is the truth that even most trained observers miss. And this is what makes this audiobook different from every body language book on the shelf. Reading people is only half the equation, perhaps even the less important half. Because the most perfectly decoded microexpression in the world is worthless if, in the moment you detect it, your own emotional system hijacks your response. If you see contempt directed at you and your ego flares. If you detect fear in your opponent and your excitement makes you overplay your hand. If you catch disgust and your own defensive reaction closes down your strategic thinking. The external intelligence system you have been building across these chapters, the cognitive X-ray, the baseline protocol, and now micro-expression reading, all of it depends on an internal operating system that most people have never built. A mind that does not react. A mind that observes, processes, and chooses a response with surgical precision. A mind that is, for all practical purposes, invincible. See clearly, think coldly, act decisively. That internal system is what you build starting in the next chapter. You will learn a method called the art of cold reading, a technique that integrates everything you have learned so far into a single, fluid process you can deploy in real time, in any room, against any opponent. And you will discover why the most powerful readers of human behavior are not the ones who see the most. They are the ones who reveal the least. Chapter 5. The Art of Cold Reading. In 1948, the psychologist Bertram Forer gave his students a personality assessment. Each student answered a series of questions, and a week later, Forer handed each one a unique personality profile, supposedly generated from their individual responses. He asked them to rate how accurately the profile described them on a scale from 0 to 5. The average rating was 4.26 out of 5. The students were astonished by how precisely the assessment had captured their inner selves. There was one problem. Every single student received the exact same profile, word for word. Forer had assembled it from a newspaper horoscope column. That experiment, now known as the Barnum effect after the showman P.T. Barnum, has been replicated over 100 times across multiple decades and cultures with remarkably consistent results. Human beings are hardwired to accept vague, general statements as deeply personal truths when they believe those statements were crafted specifically for them. And this cognitive vulnerability is the engine that powers every psychic reading, every astrology column, every manipulative flattery technique, and every con artist's opening move in human history. Now, you can use that knowledge in one of two ways. You can remain a target of it, which is what 97% of people are. Or you can understand the mechanics so thoroughly that you become immune to it when it is used against you and capable of deploying ethical cold reading as a strategic communication tool when you need it. This chapter teaches you the second path. Cold reading, in its professional application, is not trickery. It is rapid behavioral assessment combined with strategic feedback delivery. Intelligence analysts, hostage negotiators, elite sales professionals, and clinical psychologists all use variations of cold reading to build rapport, extract information, and guide conversations toward specific outcomes. The difference between a con artist and a professional is not the technique. It is the intent. Here is how cold reading actually works when stripped of mysticism and reduced to its operational mechanics. It runs on three principles working simultaneously. Principle 1 is high probability assumption. Dr. Susan Fiske, a social psychologist at Princeton University who has spent over 3 decades studying social cognition, demonstrated that human beings fall into predictable demographic behavioral clusters with remarkable consistency. Age, profession, clothing, posture, speech patterns, and environmental context allow a trained observer to generate assumptions that are accurate approximately 65 to 70% of the time before a single word of meaningful conversation has been exchanged. You are not guessing randomly. You are running a probability engine informed by thousands of hours of prior observation. When a man in his mid-30s walks into a negotiation wearing an expensive watch but ill-fitting shoes, you already know something. The watch signals aspiration toward status. The shoes signal that his financial reality has not yet caught the aspiration. When a woman in a leadership meeting speaks with controlled precision but unconsciously grips the arm of her chair during budget discussions, you already know something. The controlled speech signals competence and preparation. The chair grip signals that the budget topic activates her stress response. These are not psychic insights. They are high-probability assumptions generated by integrating visual data through the frameworks you have already learned. Motive mapping from the cognitive X-ray. Baseline observation from the protocol. Micro-expression detection from the triangle scan. Cold reading is not a new skill. It is the integration layer that connects everything you have built so far into a single fluid process. Principle 2 is the forking statement. This is the operational technique that separates amateur guesswork from professional cold reading. A forking statement is a carefully constructed sentence that appears specific but actually covers two or more possible realities, allowing you to read the listener's response and follow the correct branch without ever appearing to have been uncertain. Here is an example in a professional context. You are meeting a new client for the first time. Based on your high-probability assessment, you believe they are either dealing with a team management challenge or a strategic direction problem, but you are not sure which. Instead of guessing, you deploy a forking statement. In my experience, leaders at your level tend to reach a point where the biggest obstacle is not the strategy itself, but getting the people around them aligned with the direction. Watch what happens. If their primary issue is team management, they will lean forward, nod, and likely begin sharing specifics about their team challenges. If their primary issue is strategic direction, they will partially agree but redirect, saying something like, "That is part of it, but honestly, the bigger question is whether we are even pursuing the right direction." Either way, they have just revealed their core concern, and from their perspective, you demonstrated extraordinary insight. You did not guess. You did not ask a clumsy diagnostic question. You made a statement that felt penetrating and personal, and they voluntarily handed you the intelligence you needed. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology by Dr. Emily Pronine at Princeton demonstrated that people attribute significantly higher competence and insight to those who make statements about them rather than those who ask questions. Questions signal that you are seeking information. Statements signal that you already possess it. The forking statement exploits this asymmetry by allowing you to project expertise while simultaneously gathering data. Principle 3 is the echo and advance technique. Once a person has responded to your forking statement and revealed their primary concern, you do not simply acknowledge it. You echo their core emotional state using slightly more precise language than they used, then advance the conversation one step deeper than they expected. If a client says, "Honestly, the team just is not executing the way they should," you do not respond with, "So you are having team problems." That is surface-level parroting that makes you sound like a chatbot. Instead, you echo the emotion and advance. So the frustration is not that they lack capability. It is that something is blocking the translation from understanding to action, and you are carrying the weight of that gap personally. Notice what happened. You reflected their emotional reality, frustration, and personal burden with more precision than they articulated it themselves. Then you advanced into territory they had not yet verbalized, the gap between understanding and action. This creates a powerful psychological effect that Dr. Carl Rogers, the founder of person-centered therapy, documented extensively. When a person feels understood at a level deeper than their own articulation, they experience what Rogers called unconditional positive regard meets cognitive resonance. Trust accelerates, defensiveness drops, and the person begins voluntarily disclosing information at a depth they would normally reserve for close confidence. The average person in a professional interaction asks questions, listens to answers, and responds to the surface content. The elite operator deploys high-probability assumptions to project insight, uses forking statements to extract intelligence without revealing uncertainty, and applies echo and advance to build trust at a speed that most people cannot explain but cannot resist. This is the complete external intelligence system. Across the last 4 chapters, you have built the cognitive X-ray to simulate minds, the baseline protocol to detect deception, micro-expression reading to decode involuntary emotional truth, and now cold reading to integrate all 3 into a seamless real-time process. You can walk into any room and, within the first 5 minutes, identify what people want, detect who is hiding something, read the emotions they cannot suppress, and guide the conversation toward the outcome you need. But I need to issue a warning here, and it is not a soft one. Everything you have learned in these first 5 chapters is a weapon, and like any weapon, it is only as disciplined as the person wielding it. Dr. Keltner at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center has published extensive research showing that as people gain social power and interpersonal influence, their empathy circuits begin to degrade. He calls it the power paradox. The very skills that elevate you can, without deliberate internal discipline, turn you into the manipulator you originally sought to defend against. You start using cold reading not to understand people, but to control them. You start using the baseline protocol not to detect deception, but to manufacture leverage. You start reading micro-expressions not to connect with reality, but to exploit vulnerability. That path leads to a specific destination. You become effective in the short term and isolated in the long term. You win negotiations and lose relationships. You gain control and lose trust. Every high-functioning sociopath in history has had excellent people-reading skills. What they lacked was the internal architecture to use those skills with integrity. This is why the second half of this audiobook exists. See clearly, think coldly, act decisively. Starting in the next chapter, we shift from the external battlefield to the internal one. You have learned how to read the world. Now you will learn how to master yourself. Chapter 6 introduces emotional Kevlar, the layered defense system that makes you structurally immune to stress, criticism, and emotional hijacking. And the first principle of emotional Kevlar will challenge everything you currently believe about what it means to be mentally strong. Because strength, as you are about to discover, has almost nothing to do with resistance and everything to do with architecture. Chapter 6. Emotional Kevlar, Building Stress Immunity. In 2004, a team of neuroscientists at the University of Wisconsin-Madison placed Tibetan Buddhist monk Matthew Ricard inside a functional MRI scanner and asked him to meditate on compassion. What they observed broke every existing model of human brain function. Ricard's left prefrontal cortex, the region associated with positive emotion and emotional regulation, produced gamma wave activity at a level never previously recorded in the scientific literature. Not slightly elevated, not moderately unusual. The readings were so far beyond the normal range that the researchers initially assumed their equipment was malfunctioning. It was not. Ricard's brain had been physically restructured by decades of deliberate mental training. His neural architecture had been engineered to process stress, negativity, and emotional pressure in a fundamentally different way than an untrained mind. You do not need to spend 30 years in a monastery, but you need to understand what that study proved. Mental toughness is not a personality trait. It is not something you are born with or without. It is a structural characteristic of the brain that can be deliberately built, measured, and optimized. And the technology for building it has existed for over 2,000 years. It just was not called neuroscience. It was called Stoicism. Everything you learned in the first 5 chapters of this audiobook, the cognitive X-ray, the baseline protocol, micro-expression reading, cold reading, all of it becomes operationally useless the moment your emotional system gets hijacked. Dr. Amy Aronson at Yale School of Medicine has published extensive research demonstrating that when the amygdala activates under stress, it effectively shuts down the prefrontal cortex. Your working memory degrades. Your pattern recognition collapses. Your ability to read subtle social cues drops to near zero. In neurological terms, stress does not just make you feel bad. It physically disconnects the brain regions you need for everything you have learned so far. This is why emotional Kevlar is not optional. It is the operating system on which every other skill runs. Emotional Kevlar is built in 3 layers, each one providing a different type of protection against a different category of psychological threat. Layer 1 protects against acute stress, the sudden spike of cortisol triggered by confrontation, crisis, or unexpected bad news. Layer 2 protects against chronic erosion, the slow grinding wear of sustained pressure, criticism, and toxic environments. Layer 3 protects against identity attacks, the most dangerous category, where someone targets not just your performance or your position, but your sense of who you are. Layer 1 is the cortisol circuit breaker. When acute stress hits, your sympathetic nervous system triggers what researchers call the fight or flight response, a cascade of neurochemical events that evolved to help you survive physical threats. The problem is that your brain cannot distinguish between a lion charging at you and your CEO questioning your competence in front of the board. The neurochemical response is identical. Adrenaline surges. Cortisol floods your bloodstream. Your heart rate spikes. Blood flow redirects away from your prefrontal cortex and toward your large muscle groups. You are now biologically prepared to fight or run, neither of which is an appropriate response in a boardroom. The cortisol circuit breaker uses a technique validated by researchers at the HeartMath Institute and published in the American Journal of Cardiology. It is called cardiac coherence breathing, and it works by directly stimulating the vagus nerve, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system and counteracts the stress cascade in real time. Here's the protocol. The moment you feel acute stress activation, a rapid heartbeat, a flush of heat, a tightening in your chest, you execute a 6-second cycle. Inhale through the nose for 4 seconds. Exhale through the mouth for 6 seconds. That asymmetric ratio is critical. The longer exhale directly stimulates vagal tone, which sends a neurochemical signal to your amygdala to reduce threat processing. Research from the HeartMath Institute demonstrated that 3 consecutive cycles, taking approximately 30 seconds total, reduce cortisol levels by measurable amounts and restore prefrontal cortex function within 60 to 90 seconds. 30 seconds. That is all it takes to break the cortisol circuit and bring your full cognitive capacity back online. The average person spends 45 minutes to 2 hours recovering from an acute stress event. The trained operator recovers in 30 seconds. That gap is not marginal. In a negotiation, a confrontation, or a crisis, it is the difference between making a decision from your prefrontal cortex and making one from your amygdala. One produces strategy, the other produces regret. Layer 2 is the erosion shield. Acute stress is dramatic but temporary. Chronic stress is quiet and devastating. Dr. Robert Sapolsky at Stanford University has spent over 3 decades studying the effects of prolonged cortisol exposure on the brain. His research, published across multiple papers in journals including Nature Neuroscience, demonstrates that chronic stress literally shrinks the hippocampus, degrades synaptic connections in the prefrontal cortex, and enlarges the amygdala. Your brain physically rewires itself to become more reactive, less rational, and less capable of complex thought the longer you remain in a high-stress environment without intervention. The erosion shield operates on a principle that Marcus Aurelius articulated in his Meditations nearly 2,000 years before Sapolsky confirmed it in a laboratory. The principle is this: you do not control events. You control your judgment of events. And your judgment, not the event itself, is what generates the stress response. Aurelius wrote, and I am paraphrasing into modern language, that the object itself has no power to form your judgments. It is you who generates the interpretation. Remove the interpretation, and the pain is removed. Neuroscience now confirms this with precision. Dr. Kevin Oxner at Columbia University's Social Cognitive Neuroscience Laboratory published research in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience showing that cognitive reappraisal, the deliberate reinterpretation of a stressful event, reduces amygdala activation by an average of 38%. Not suppressing the emotion, not ignoring it, reinterpreting the meaning of the event that triggered it. When you change the story your brain tells about what happened, the neurochemical response changes with it. Here is the operational technique. The erosion shield uses a 3-question filter that you apply to any chronic stressor. Question 1. Is this within my control? If the answer is no, you release it. Not because you do not care, but because investing emotional energy in uncontrollable variables is neurochemically identical to poisoning your own prefrontal cortex. Question 2. If it is within my control, what is the smallest action I can take in the next 24 hours? This question breaks the paralysis loop that chronic stress creates by converting abstract worry into concrete microaction. Question 3. What is the most useful interpretation of this situation? Not the most positive interpretation, not blind optimism, the most useful one. The interpretation that gives you the highest quality information and the clearest path to action. The average person under chronic stress asks themselves one question on an endless loop. Why is this happening to me? That question has no actionable answer. It generates rumination, which Dr. Susan Nolan-Hoeksema at Yale demonstrated increases cortisol production by up to 23% and extends the duration of depressive episodes. You are literally making yourself weaker by asking the wrong question. The 3-question filter replaces the rumination loop with a decision-action loop. It does not eliminate stress. It converts stress from a neurochemical poison into a navigational signal. Layer 3 is the identity fortress. This is the deepest and most critical layer because identity attacks bypass rational processing entirely. When someone insults your work, you can evaluate the feedback objectively. When someone attacks who you are, your competence, your intelligence, your worth, the threat registers at the level of survival. Dr. Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA's Social Cognitive Neuroscience Laboratory published research in the journal Science demonstrating that social rejection and identity threats activate the same neural circuitry as physical pain. The brain processes "you are not good enough" with the same machinery it uses for "you have been stabbed." This is why identity attacks feel so disproportionately devastating. They are, neurologically, a form of injury. The identity fortress is built on a Stoic principle that Epictetus, the philosopher who developed his entire system while enduring slavery, expressed with brutal clarity. It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. The operational translation is this: your identity must be anchored to internal variables that no external force can touch. If your sense of self is built on your job title, one reorganization destroys you. If your identity is anchored to others' approval, one powerful critic dismantles you. If your worth is measured by outcomes, one failure breaks you. The elite operator anchors identity to process, not outcomes. To effort, not results. To character, not reputation. Epictetus would say it this way: your character is yours. Everything else is borrowed. The modern neuroscience version, supported by Dr. Carol Dweck's research on identity and mindset at Stanford, confirms that individuals who anchor their self-concept to controllable internal processes show significantly higher resilience, faster recovery from setbacks, and lower baseline cortisol levels than those who anchor to external markers of success. Here is your identity fortress protocol. Write down 3 statements that define who you are using only variables you control. Not, "I am a successful entrepreneur." That depends on market conditions, investors, and luck. Instead, "I am someone who executes relentlessly regardless of conditions." Not, "I am respected by my team." That depends on other people. Instead, "I am someone who leads with integrity whether or not it is recognized." These 3 statements become your psychological bedrock. When an identity attack lands, you run it against your 3 anchors. If the attack addresses something outside your anchors, it is irrelevant. If it addresses something inside your anchors, it is useful feedback. Either way, it does not wound. It informs. See clearly, think coldly, act decisively. You now have the 3-layer emotional Kevlar system. The cortisol circuit breaker for acute stress, the erosion shield for chronic pressure, the identity fortress for attacks on your sense of self. Together, they create an internal architecture that does not suppress emotion, but processes it so efficiently that nothing reaches your decision-making core unfiltered. But defense is only half of internal mastery. In the next chapter, You will learn the most powerful offensive mental framework ever developed. Stoic reframing, the method that turns every obstacle, every setback, every enemy action into fuel for your advancement. Marcus Aurelius used it to govern an empire during a plague. You are about to learn how to use it to dominate every challenge in your path. Chapter 7. Stoic Reframing, Obstacles into Weapons. In the winter of 168 AD, Marcus Aurelius sat inside a military tent on the frozen banks of the Danube River, surrounded by death. The Antonine Plague, likely smallpox, was tearing through his legions. Historians estimate it killed between 5 and 10 million people across the Roman Empire, roughly 7 to 10% of the entire population. His most trusted generals were dying. His supply lines were collapsing. Germanic tribes were launching raids across the border, sensing Roman weakness. And the man responsible for holding the largest empire on earth together did not panic, did not rage, did not retreat into despair. He picked up a pen and wrote what would become one of the most influential texts in the history of human thought. In Book 5 of his Meditations, he wrote a line that, nearly 2,000 years later, neuroscience would confirm as a precise description of how the brain can be deliberately rewired. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. That single principle is the most powerful cognitive tool you will ever learn. And it is not philosophy. It is an operating instruction for your prefrontal cortex. Stoic reframing is the mental framework that converts obstacles from threats into raw material. Not through positive thinking, not through denial, not through motivational slogans. Through a systematic restructuring of how your brain categorizes and processes negative events. And the neuroscience behind it is not theoretical. It is some of the most rigorously validated research in modern cognitive science. Dr. Richard Lazarus at UC Berkeley developed the foundational model for understanding this process. His transactional model of stress, published across multiple landmark papers and cited over 40,000 times, demonstrated that the psychological impact of any event is not determined by the event itself, but by two sequential cognitive appraisals. The primary appraisal asks, is this a threat, a challenge, or irrelevant? The secondary appraisal asks, do I have the resources to cope with this? Lazarus proved that these appraisals are not automatic. They are malleable. They can be consciously overridden. And the appraisal you choose determines the entire neurochemical cascade that follows. When your brain classifies an event as a threat, it triggers cortisol and adrenaline. Your amygdala activates. Your prefrontal cortex dims. You become reactive, defensive, and cognitively impaired. When your brain classifies the same event as a challenge, it triggers a different cocktail entirely, one dominated by adrenaline and dopamine, with cortisol present but regulated. Your prefrontal cortex stays online. Your working memory remains functional. Your creative problem-solving capability actually increases. Same event, different appraisal, radically different brain state. Stoic reframing is the deliberate practice of forcing the challenge appraisal in situations where your default would be the threat appraisal. And it operates through 3 specific techniques. Technique 1 is the inversion protocol. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. Epictetus taught it to his students as the foundation of all Stoic training. And Dr. Gabrielle Eddingen at New York University validated a modern version of it in over 20 years of research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. The inversion protocol works like this. When an obstacle appears, your instinct is to ask, how do I get rid of this problem? The Stoic operator asks a fundamentally different question. What does this obstacle make possible that was not possible before? This is not optimism. This is strategic analysis. When a key team member quits unexpectedly, the average person asks how to replace them. The Stoic operator asks what restructuring opportunity this creates that was politically impossible while that person was in the role. When a deal falls through, the average person mourns the lost revenue. The Stoic operator asks what the failed negotiation revealed about the client's true priorities that can be leveraged in the next approach. When a competitor launches an aggressive move, the average person scrambles to defend. The Stoic operator asks what gap the competitor just revealed in their own positioning by making that move. The inversion protocol does not deny that the obstacle is real. It does not minimize the difficulty. It asks a better question, and better questions generate better cognitive outputs. Dr. Edingen's research, which she formalized as mental contrasting, demonstrated that individuals who practiced this inversion process showed a 31% increase in goal attainment compared to those who used either pure positive visualization or pure obstacle focus. The brain needs both the obstacle and the opportunity process simultaneously to generate optimal action plans. The Stoics understood this intuitively. Modern science confirmed it empirically. Technique 2 is the decatastrophizing engine. The human brain has a well-documented tendency toward catastrophic thinking, assuming the worst possible outcome is the most likely outcome. Dr. Aaron Beck, the founder of cognitive behavioral therapy at the University of Pennsylvania, identified catastrophizing as one of the core cognitive distortions that drives anxiety, poor decision-making, and emotional reactivity. His research demonstrated that when people catastrophize, they overestimate the probability of negative outcomes by an average of 40% and underestimate their own coping ability by an average of 50%. You are, in cognitive terms, running a consistently rigged simulation that makes reality look worse and yourself look weaker than either actually is. The decatastrophizing engine uses a 3-tier reality test. When you face a setback or an obstacle that triggers catastrophic thinking, you process it through 3 questions in rapid sequence. First, what is the actual worst-case scenario if I do nothing? Not the imagined catastrophe. The literal, realistic worst case supported by evidence. Write it down. Second, what is the most probable outcome based on historical patterns? Not what your fear is projecting. What actually tends to happen in situations like this based on data you have observed? Write that down. Third, what is the best realistic outcome if I respond with full capability? Not fantasy, not hope. The best outcome that your skills, resources, and network can actually produce. In every case I have ever seen this exercise apply professionally, and research from Dr. Beck's cognitive therapy framework supports this across thousands of clinical trials. The realistic worst case is significantly less catastrophic than the imagined one. The most probable outcome is manageable, and the best realistic outcome is surprisingly strong. Your brain was not lying to you because it is broken. It was lying to you because catastrophic projection is an evolutionary survival mechanism designed for environments where the wrong choice meant being eaten. You do not live in that environment anymore, but your amygdala still thinks you do. The decatastrophizing engine overrides that ancient programming with current reality data. Technique 3 is the obstacle inventory. This is the technique that transforms Stoic reframing from a reactive tool into a proactive strategic advantage. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who served as advisor to Emperor Nero and navigated what historians consider one of the most politically lethal courts in Roman history, practiced a daily exercise he called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Every morning, he would mentally rehearse the worst things that could happen that day, not to create anxiety, to eliminate surprise. Dr. Gary Klein, a cognitive psychologist who developed the pre-mortem analysis method now used by the United States Army, CIA, and numerous Fortune 500 companies, formalized a strikingly similar technique. In a pre-mortem, before launching a project or entering a high-stakes situation, you imagine that the project has already failed spectacularly. Then you work backward to identify the most likely causes of that failure. Klein's research, published in the Harvard Business Review, demonstrated that the pre-mortem technique increases the ability to identify potential problems by 30% compared to traditional planning methods. The obstacle inventory combines Seneca's morning practice with Klein's pre-mortem into a daily operational protocol. Each morning, before you begin your workday, take 90 seconds to answer 2 questions. What is the most likely obstacle I will face today? And what is my predetermined response? That predetermined response is critical. Dr. Peter Gollwitzer at New York University has published extensive research on what he calls implementation intentions. showing that when you predefine your response to a specific obstacle, your follow-through rate increases from approximately 30% to over 90%. You are not relying on willpower in the moment. You are installing an automated response before the moment arrives. The average person encounters an obstacle and enters a reactive processing loop. They feel the emotional hit. They ruminate on the unfairness. They scramble for options under cognitive impairment. The Stoic operator encounters the same obstacle and executes a predetermined response with zero emotional delay because they already processed the scenario hours or days ago. The obstacle is not a surprise. It is a scheduled event, and their response is not improvised. It is engineered. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote that the impediment to action advances action. He was not offering a motivational platitude. He was describing a cognitive protocol. When you invert the obstacle to find hidden opportunity, decatastrophize the threat to see realistic proportions, and pre-inventory the challenge to eliminate surprise, the obstacle does not block your path. It becomes the path. It generates information, builds resilience, reveals hidden opportunities, and trains your neural architecture to process adversity as signal rather than noise. See clearly, think coldly, act decisively. You now have the offensive weapon of internal mastery. Emotional Kevlar protects you from being damaged. Stoic reframing turns the incoming damage into fuel. Together, they create a mind that does not merely survive adversity. It metabolizes adversity into advantage. But there is one critical skill remaining in the internal architecture that ties everything together: the skill of strategic silence. In the next chapter, you will learn the silence protocol, a communication system built on a counterintuitive truth that the most powerful leaders in history understood and that modern psychology has confirmed with data. The person who controls a room is almost never the one who speaks the most. They are the one who controls when and how silence is deployed. And what you are about to learn will fundamentally change the way you use your voice for the rest of your career. Chapter 8. The Final Arsenal: Silence, Neutralization, and Your New Identity. In 2003, Dr. Deepak Malhotra at Harvard Business School analyzed over 700 negotiations and discovered that negotiators who spoke less achieved superior outcomes in 67% of cases. Silence is not absence. It is a weapon. Research from the University of Groningen confirmed that a pause lasting just 4 seconds triggers measurable anxiety in the listener. Here is your protocol. After asking any critical question, count silently to 7. Do not nod. Do not fill the space. In over 80% of cases, the other person will reveal more than they intended simply because the silence became unbearable. The elite operator does not dominate conversations with volume. They dominate with precision. Every word either changes the trajectory or does not get spoken. But strategic communication means nothing if the people around you are toxic. Dr. Christine Porath at Georgetown University studied 14,000 workers and found that a single toxic individual reduces team performance by 30 to 40%. One person outweighs 2 high performers. You need to recognize 3 types. The covert aggressor who disguises attacks as concern, neutralized through documented patterns presented as evidence. The emotional vampire who drains energy through perpetual crisis, neutralized through rigid time and emotional boundaries repeated without variation. And the gaslighter who distorts your reality, neutralized through external verification, written records, and a trusted outside perspective that breaks their monopoly on truth. The principle across all 3 is the same. You do not reform toxic people. Research shows behavioral intervention succeeds less than 12% of the time. You contain, neutralize, and remove yourself when strategically possible. Now let me tell you what you carry. The cognitive X-ray to simulate minds. The baseline protocol to detect deception. Micro-expression reading to decode involuntary truth. Cold reading to integrate intelligence gathering in real time. The silence protocol to weaponize restraint. Emotional Kevlar to absorb stress across 3 layers. Stoic reframing to convert obstacles into fuel. And neutralization protocols to eliminate toxic threats. This is not a collection of tips. This is an integrated operating system, and the person who runs it is the integrated operator. Dr. Benjamin Hardy at Clemson University demonstrated that individuals who adopt a new identity label sustain behavioral change at dramatically higher rates than those who simply set goals. I want to read people better is a goal. I am someone who sees what others miss is an identity. Goals create compliance. Identity creates transformation. You have two choices right now. Treat the last 90 minutes as interesting content and lose 79% of it within 72 hours, which is exactly what Dr. Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve predicts. Or deploy one protocol tomorrow morning. 1. The baseline protocol in a meeting. The triangle scan in a conversation. The 3-question filter during a stressful moment. One deployment converts theory into experiential memory that your brain stores permanently. The 3% do not know more than the 97%. They deploy more. See clearly. Think coldly. Act decisively. The invisible war does not end. But from this moment forward, you are no longer fighting it unarmed.